ever had that experience where you're just starting to wake up and you're thinking, man, that was a crazy dream I was having, and then you wake all the way up and realize that wasn't a dream at all? Well, that was me this morning. I made it, y'all.
My flight from the US was nearly 24 to 25 hours long. The longest leg was Los Angeles to Sydney, which was about 13 and a half hours. We made really good time. We arrived a little bit early, which was fine for me because I only had like an hour and 45 minutes between arriving in Sydney and my departing flight for Queenstown. The problem was because we arrived so early, there was another plane in our gate, so we had to wait on the tarmac for a few minutes while the other plane was unloading, and then they quickly got out of the way so we could get into the gate so everybody could get off the plane so that plane could move. It was a whole thing. So we got off the plane and you follow the track down and there's a whole wall of electronic face recognition technology coolness, and a lot of people were queuing up for those. So I just kind of poked someone in line and said, is this where I need to go for an international transfer? And he said, no, you need to go to the end of the hallway and turn left. And there was a big sign at the end of the hall that said international transfers right in front of me. I go around the corner, there's two lines, and I'm not sure which one to be in, so I just got in one and hoped for the best. And then I got into the main terminal, and there's a big mall in the main terminal, but I only have like 2 hours, so I just kind of ran through the terminal, made it to the other end. It was an international terminal, but it's a very small terminal, and I walked up to one of the employees there, and I'm trying to get to XYZ flight to Queenstown, New Zealand, and they said, oh yeah, go down the elevator, and you go down this little elevator to this little waiting area on the ground floor, and there's a big sign that says it's either gate 25 or 26, A, B, C, D, E. My boarding pass is 26A, I think. So you go down the A line and it takes you to a door, and then that door leads you to a bus, and you get on the bus and they drive you out to the plane. You have to walk up the little ramp stair thing, find your seat, put everything in the overhead bins and under your seat, and sit down. On my flight from LAX to Sydney, because it was like supposed to be 14-15 hours, I didn't want to be next to a window because we're flying all night and I don't want to be climbing over random strangers to go to the bathroom every couple hours, so I put myself in an aisle seat. But with my flight from Sydney to Queenstown, it's now 9:30 in the morning. We were going to get in around 2:30 in the afternoon because there's about a 2-hour time difference between the two countries, and I wanted to make sure that I got to see New Zealand out that window as we were flying into it. Maybe about 30 minutes outside Queenstown, we started to actually see land, but it was all very, very cloudy.
Fun fact from future me. The Maori name for New Zealand, Aotearoa, literally translates to Island of the Long White Cloud. So it is oddly appropriate that when I arrived on my flight in New Zealand, the first thing I was able to see was this giant white cloud covering the whole thing.
And then like through the clouds, you would start to see like these rolling hills and these big mountain peaks and these snow-covered landscape. I know I've mentioned in previous videos I was supposed to come on this trip or something similar to this trip back in 2020, which obviously didn't happen because of COVID. So I did get a little teared up when we started descending into Queenstown and I started to see New Zealand through the clouds and realizing like I'm actually here, my plane is about to land here, I'm actually gonna do this. Queenstown International Airport is the 4th busiest airport in the country of New Zealand. I got my check bag, I went through customs, and then I was here. I was in New Zealand, and it was freezing outside. And I just stood outside that airport and just laughed, like, oh my goodness, I'm actually here. And people are kind of staring at me like, strange American. And I finally just said, I need to get out of the cold and I need to go to my hotel. My hotel was actually in the Frankton Arm across the lake from Queenstown. It was like 2:30 in the afternoon and I checked into my room. It was a little too early to go to bed, so I put on my coat and I went down to the harbor, and there was this nice little walking bike trail that went right by the lake, so I just kind of walked around on that for a little bit. And then I decided I'm gonna go over to Queenstown and see what's actually there. There's a ferry that goes from right outside my hotel in the Frankton Arm and kind of curves around back into the harbor area of Queenstown. And the skipper of the water taxi told us, just so you know, when we get out of the Frankton Arm, I've just received word that the water is going to be really rough for like 5 or 10 minutes when we get out of the Frankton Arm. But, you know, it'll clear up by the time we get into the harbor. Everyone on the boat, they all seemed really comfortable, like they've all done this before, until we got out of the Frankton Arm and started heading into the actual Queenstown part of the lake. And then the water, I kid not, the boat was going like this and the waves were crashing. So we were turning to come around the Frankton Arm. The boat is like nearly on its side, and the other people in the boat are looking as terrified as I feel. Like, this isn't normal. I'm never gonna do this again. If this is what it's like, I'm never gonna do this again. I took that a lot because a lot of my day tours left from like Queenstown proper. So I would just, you know, run out, jump on the water taxi and go to Queenstown and then just speed walk down to this little bus stop that was outside a cafe. And that's where a lot of the tours would pick you up if your hotel wasn't like in town. So I got into Queenstown and just walked along the harbor, took some pictures of the sunset, took some pictures of statues.
There's a statue of a dude with a sheep, and we're gonna go investigate it.
The statue is of William Reese. He was one of the early settlers of the area and considered to be the founder of Queenstown, hence why there's a statue of him in the middle of Queenstown.
And I was starting to kind of feel tired. So went out, found the nearest taxi, and guy took me back to my hotel and I got room service because why not? I started my visit to Queenstown, as one should, with a 9 a.m. jet lag massage. The hotel has a spa connected to it, and I noticed on their menu of services that they had a jet lag massage. My massage therapist's name was Teresa. She's from the Czech Republic. She was traveling in New Zealand for work and had worked in different spas across the country. And Teresa did a really good job with like really good medium firm pressure. I was very happy with my massage. It was very like just enough firmness but still a relaxing experience. After my massage, they take you into this little room. There are a bunch of couches and there are these blankets and they make you tea and there's water and calming music and stuff. And so I'm sitting in this room drinking my tea, kind of just relaxing in my bathrobe in my pajamas, and I look out the window and I'm like, that looks like snow coming down, like a flurry. It wasn't sticking or anything, but it was snowing. And so that was kind of like, okay, it's gonna be really cold out today. So I opted not to wear my Hobbit costume for my first Lord of the Rings tour that afternoon. Speaking to the unpredictableness of New Zealand weather, it was very cold in the beginning, but then warmed up that afternoon. I was like, drat, I could have worn my costume after all. It would have been fine. That afternoon, I once again took the water taxi into Queenstown, speed walked down to the little bus station I mentioned earlier, and was picked up by my first Lord of the Rings tour. I chose to go with Pure Glenorchy Tours because they have exclusive rights to visit the Isengard filming location from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, as well as Beorn's house in the Hobbit movies. Our tour guide's name was Vicky. She was actually an extra in the second Lord of the Rings movie. She's one of the evacuees from Rohan going to Helm's Deep, and she told us a little bit about her experience being in the scene. So that was really cool. There were 4 of us on the tour. She said that was the smallest group she'd had all week. Our first stop was at this nature reserve hiking trail, but at the end of this camper van area was a parking area. We walked a little bit down the trail to this ridge over the river, and this ridge was where Sam and Frodo are by their fire and Gollum brings them the conies. It's the potatoes scene. Boil up, mash them, stick them in a stew. That's where that scene was filmed, on this ridge. And then they hear a noise and they're kind of, you know, on their bellies crawling up to this ridge, watching the Oliphants come through the clearing in the little valley down here. That's where we were. So we took pictures of us laying in the location where that scene was filmed and looking out at that valley. We got back in the car and we drove a little bit farther past Glenorchy, past Paradise, out to Mount Aspiring National Park, and reached the farmland where Isengard and Beorn's house are located. The owner of the farm has kind of a gentleman's agreement with the owner of our tour company that allows this particular tour company to bring tours to this location. So we got out to this hillock overlooking Isengard, right under the mountains that were used as the Misty Mountains in the two towers. There's a break higher up in the mountainside that they used as the dam and used CGI to have the water come out of the dam when the Ents flooded Isengard in the second movie. And on the other side of the road, kind of across from where our car was parked, there's this big kind of greenish yellow tree, and she holds up another picture and says, see, that's the tree right outside Bjorn's house. They built Bjorn's house like right by that tree. And it was really, really beautiful weather out. I actually had to take my jacket off because I was hot. Vicky, our tour guide, brought out some coffee and tea and biscuits. So we had a lovely tea and admired the scenery. On the way back from Paradise, we stopped in the forest, and this forest was used as the entrance to Lothlorien in the first Lord of the Rings movie, when they're first crossing the river and entering Lothlorien, and Gimli the dwarf is saying, I'm so stealthy, dwarves are so stealthy, and of course he's the first one who walks into the point of an arrow, and the whole company is then overtaken by all these elves with these arrows before they're brought deeper into Lothlorien to meet Galadriel and Celeborn. And that was actually where the tour got really fun, because Vicky had a bunch of prop costumes and prop swords in the back of the van that we were in. We had Gandalf's robe and hat, and we had Gandalf's staff, and we had Aragorn's sword, Anduril, and we had an elf blade, we had a hobbit sword, and so we all got to like dress up and kind of just wander around in these Lothlorien elven woods in New Zealand and pose with our costumes and kind of pretend that we were in the movie, which was really fun. And then we headed back, we drove through the little towns of Paradise and Glenorchy. We stopped outside the Red Barn in Glenorchy.
The Glenorchy area was settled by Europeans in the mid-1800s, and the Red Shed in Glenorchy was used as a storage and sorting facility for goods that arrived on the barges from other places. It was also technically a railway station because the steamers that brought the goods to the Glenorchy area were owned by the New Zealand Railways Department.
That night I went out for dinner and I found a restaurant that was on the pier. It was very good. The next day, my second full day in Queenstown, was a very busy day. I was advised by people I know who have been to New Zealand to do the Doubtful Sound cruise instead of the more popular and well-known Milford Sound cruise. I had like 3 other people in New Zealand say, that's even better than Milford Sound, like you made a really good decision. And I was like, okay, cool, I feel great. I haven't been to Milford Sound, so I can't compare them, but Doubtful Sound was really, really pretty. So to get to Doubtful Sound, you take a 2.5-hour bus from Queenstown out to Te Anu, and then you get on another bus that takes you to harbor, and then you get on a ferry that takes you across a lake, and then you get on another bus that takes you up through the mountains, and finally you actually get to your cruise boat. So we're talking 3 buses and a ferry just to get to the cruise boat. And then you have a 3-hour cruise in the fjords that are beautiful. And then you have to redo the entire thing. So bus, ferry, and 2 more buses to get back to where you started in Queenstown. The problem with this is I don't like boats. And yet I signed up for an all-day cruise in the fjords. I've done really well on like little speedboats in Tahiti and the calm lagoon waters, but I've also gotten violently seasick on very calm lunch cruises. I don't like boats as a rule. By the time we got off the ferry, before we even got to the cruise boat itself, I was already just like, I feel like I want to die. So I asked one of the tour guides at one point, can I just go back to the beginning and wait for you all back in Te Anu? And she said, no, the ferry doesn't even leave until we get back from the tour, so you just have to wait here at this little bus terminal for like 5 hours. So I'm here, I paid for it, I might as well just tough it out. I'll just take some Dramamine and hope for the best.
For better or worse, we are heading out on our 3-hour tour. Oh boy.
There was a viewing deck on the very top of the boat, and there was a viewing deck at the front of the very bottom level of the boat, and I spent 2.5 of the 3 hours of the cruise on one of those platforms. It was really, really, really cold, so I'm standing out there freezing, so we kept going down these little outlets of the sound. They had permanent waterfalls and temporary waterfalls. The permanent waterfalls are the ones that are there all the time, and then they have a bunch of other random waterfalls that show up when it rains or when it snows and stuff like that. So there was a point where there was a pod of like 30 dolphins that just kind of like hung out around our boat.
These are bottlenose dolphins by the look of it, I think. Here, look, there's a whole pot of them here.
Oh my
Oh,
goodness.
when we first thought. Fancy that.
There was one that maybe like jumped out of the water, but a lot of them would just like come up and briefly clip the surface and go back down. So you could kind of see their fins coming up out of the water, and they were just all around the boat. Really fun to see all those dolphins. The weather was actually fairly clear and the water wasn't too rough, so they're like, you know, we're gonna go out to the very edge of Doubtful Sound and we're gonna go a little bit into the Tasman Sea and see if we can see some sea lions out here, because sometimes the sea lions will chill on the rocks on the edge of the fjord. And so we get kind of to the end of the fjord and they say, oh, just so you know, it's gonna get a little bumpy out here. If you're outside, that's fine, just hang on to the rail. So there's a bunch of us now standing out on the front of this boat, and there are all these rails, and we're just kind of like leaning back against these rails and holding on for dear life as the boat is literally just going whoosh, whoosh, and it's spraying and people are whooping and hollering. And there was this big rock like right on the edge of the Tasman Sea, and our boat went right up to it and said, hey, look, there's a whole little group of sea lions sitting right there, and they're all just kind of like chilling on the rocks. One or two would kind of look up and be like, oh, look, another boat. He'd roll over and go back to sleep. They were really cute. Everybody like poured out onto these viewing decks and were taking pictures of them. And then after we'd been there for a few minutes, we went back down the side of another island back into the fjord. My assessment of my Fjordlands experience was, it was stunning. I'm really glad I did it. I probably will never do it again, but it was really beautiful. It was worth doing the one time. From being outside for 2.5 hours of the 3-hour cruise in the freezing, snowy fjord, I was so cold. I got back to my hotel room. I turned on my fireplace to warm up the room. I had the faucet in the shower turned all the way to the hottest setting, and I was still just shivering. And I'm just standing in the shower in this cold water thinking, I must be getting sick. I'm not getting warm. I went to bed that night going, I really hope I'm not going to be sick in the morning, and miraculously I wasn't sick. Queenstown is supposed to be one of the best places to go hot air ballooning in the world. I've done one in my hometown, so I thought it would be really fun to do one here. On the confirmation email, they say to call the morning of to get a weather check and to confirm your pickup time just in case things change. You know, it's all weather dependent, and it's all kind of dependent on what time sunrise is, and there's a bunch of mitigating factors in a hot air balloon ride. And so as I was heading down to breakfast that morning really early, I went ahead and called the hot air balloon company and was informed that unfortunately they'd had to cancel the ride that morning due to it being too windy. When you've got a basket dangling from a giant balloon in the wind, that can be very dangerous. So I understand completely why they were like, yeah, no, we're not even gonna try this. So I was sitting at breakfast going, well, I have a whole day, what should I do with myself now? Earlier on in my stay, a few of the hotel staff had recommended visiting Arrowtown and Wanaka, and so I found a half-day tour to Arrowtown and Wanaka and booked it really last minute, jumped on the water taxi, got myself into town, went into a little cafe and grabbed some coffee and some Anzac cookies for the road, and jumped on this half-day tour to Arrowtown and Wanaka. And there were maybe 14 of us. The bus wasn't full, but there was a good amount of people. And our tour guide was a very friendly older gentleman. I think he said he was from Arrowtown, so he knew that whole area really, really well. And his daughter was an extra in the Two Towers in the same scene that our tour guide Vicky was in. So he was able to talk a little bit about the filming and pointed out a few film locations on our road. We stopped in Cardrona. It was kind of a blip and you miss it town until this guy came in and he built this historic lodge there. It has dining, it has this really lovely outdoor area. And then when that guy passed on, his family moved on, the hotel kind of fell into disrepair until someone else came along and said, this is historical and should be preserved, and so he renovated it, and it's still open and functions as a hotel to this day. So we stopped at the Cardrona Hotel. We had the option to get a beer or a ginger beer. I got a ginger beer, which was very good. Ginger beer, to my experience here so far, is not as sweet as ginger ale back in the States. It was still sweet, but it wasn't like overpoweringly sweet. It was nice and refreshing on the cold days. We made one very brief stop at Broadrona, which is pretty much what it sounds like. The story goes that there were these women who were touring the area, and along the way they got really hot, so they took off some of their clothes, including their undergarments, and hung them on the fence outside of this farm. And then it just became a thing where these women would stop and hang their bras on this fence outside of this farm, outside of Cardrona, to the point where the gate has actually almost fallen over a few times. They've had to remove bras to make room for new bras. Think love locks, but with women's undergarments, and you kind of get the idea. And then another woman came along and said, I can do something with this, and so she put up a donation box and raised some insane amount of money for breast cancer research. It sounds really like cheesy and sleazy, but it was actually really cool to hear how they were able to turn this into a way to raise money for breast cancer research and treatment. We then drove into Wanaka, and we walked out to that Wanaka tree. I had never heard of it before, and I asked the tour guide, like, what is the Wanaka tree? And he was explaining to me that it became a thing because the tree is growing so far out into the lake, it shouldn't be able to grow there. There's nothing there for the roots to grab onto, and yet this tree is just there. After we'd taken our pictures of that Wanaka tree, it was about lunchtime, so our tour guide pointed out a few restaurants and then set us loose for about an hour in Wanaka. We got to talking, and he asked me if I'd had the opportunity to have a New Zealand pie yet, and I said, no, I haven't. And he said, well, go to this little pie place and try a steak and kidney or steak and cheese pie. There were these two giant heater display cases, and there were like dozens of different pies, and they just looked like these little pot pies. The one I ended up trying was mince lamb and mint. It tasted like the mint jelly was mixed in with the ground lamb and the gravy and everything in this pie. You bite into it and it just kind of melts. It just kind of falls everywhere. But it was really, really good. I keep joking I'm gonna go home and not be able to find these pies. I'll never be happy again. With my remaining time in Wanaka, I just walked up and down the main street. I popped my head into a few of the shops and kind of looked around. I stumbled into a yarn store and found some merino and possum wool. Possums were introduced to New Zealand, and they've become somewhat of a pest. The native birds have become kind of extinct because all of these pest creatures like ferrets, stoats, possums, reindeer are actually considered a pest, were introduced to New Zealand by settlers for various reasons, and they went after the native flora and fauna and have kind of decimated the native plant populations, the crops, the native flightless bird populations, and that's part of the reason why New Zealand is so strict about their biosecurity. They don't let a whole lot of things like seeds and food in because they're trying to protect what they have left of their ecosphere. Because that was one thing that surprised me coming to New Zealand, is how strict they are. You hear when you go to New Zealand you have to wash your shoes or your shoes will be thrown away, and there's like a list of all of these forbidden things, and you're just like, why are they so strict about this? But then you learn it's because they've had all of these foreign trees and foreign animals introduced into their ecosphere that then kind of decimated their natural plant life and their natural animals and flightless birds. The parrot population is all but extinct anywhere except a few places. They're trying to restore their native flora and fauna, so they're trying to protect that as much as possible from outside influences. At the end of our hour in Wanaka, we got back on the van and he drove us a little bit down the road to Arrowtown. Arrowtown is much smaller than Wanaka. It's a historic mining town. There was a gold boom around the same time that we had our American gold boom. So a lot of people came out to Macetown and Arrowtown and Queenstown itself panning for gold. And in Arrowtown specifically, there was a settlement of Chinese miners. They were, of course, put in like the darkest, scariest, coldest part of the valley next to Arrowtown, and some of their buildings have been renovated to kind of preserve the history of these Chinese miners and how they lived panning for gold by this river. We drove down kind of the main street of Arrowtown. Our tour guide pointed out some sights to see along the way. He parked, he let us out for another hour. I walked down this really, really cold path by the river out to the Chinese settlement and then just beelined it for the warmth at the top of the hill. Popped into a couple of the shops, took some pictures, got back on the van, and then we returned to Queenstown just in time for dinner. It was my last night in Queenstown. I decided I was going to be brave and try one of these restaurants that was right on the pier. I've never had fish and chips before. I'm not a seafood person at all, but I figured when in New Zealand, one should try some fish and chips. So I ended up wandering into this rather expensive little restaurant and bar. The restaurant was called The Pier, and it was appropriately on the Queenstown Pier. I walked in and I ordered a sparkling water and some fish and chips, and it was actually really good. The fish didn't taste fishy and it melted in your mouth, and for someone who doesn't like fish, it was actually really good. And that was my adventure in Queenstown, New Zealand. I was there for 4 nights, 3 full days, and I still didn't have enough time to do everything there was to do. I loved my visit to Queenstown. I enjoyed everything I did. There's a lot more I could have done in Queenstown, and I would love to come back to do other things and see other sites and take other Lord of the Rings tours. But I'm on kind of a breakneck adventure through New Zealand and by extension Middle Earth, so I unfortunately had to leave Queenstown and head up to Christchurch next, which I will discuss in my next video. Thanks for watching.
Hey,